The ops tent held the weight of 1,000 briefings, but this one started in quiet. A low buzz of conversation stirred near the projector table, punctuated by the sharp tap of boots across concrete. The screen flickered, waiting for the first light of dawn to catch up to the airstrip outside. Fluorescent bulbs hummed faintly overhead. Someone cracked open a hydration tab and dropped it into a metal cup. The fizz was louder than the room's attention span. Jessie stood near the back wall, just out of the way, already zipped into her flight harness. Her gloves were looped through her belt the same way she'd worn them every morning since the first medevac call she ever took. Her helmet rested under one arm. Not for show, but because it was clean and ready. The sweatband had been replaced last week. Not because it was required, but because she didn't like the way it held old dust from another pilot. She adjusted the strap once, then stilled again. Colonel Hayes entered without ceremony. The conversations near the table dropped 2 notches, but no one snapped to attention. This wasn't a formal address. It was flight rotation prep, the kind where everyone already thought they knew what they were doing. "Morning brief," Hayes said as he unrolled the clear panel and clipped it over the ops board. "Mainline storm is expected to skirt the northern edge of the ridge by 1400. Chinook elements remain grounded. Fighter cover's a maybe. We've got 3 requests pending priority clearance. Keep your birds clean and loaded. Any questions before I assign routes?" Nobody raised a hand. Someone near the coffee heater snorted at something on their tablet. A younger pilot in a sweat-worn undershirt elbowed the guy next to him and said something about a detour being faster if they banked the south run under cloud cover. No one corrected him. Hayes moved to the names list. Jessie's was 3rd from the bottom. Her call sign wasn't written, only her last name, a hyphen, and standby. She kept her posture neutral. The assignments began. Hayes moved briskly, calling out pilots, routes, and cargo weights. The heavier tactical crews got the meat of it: ridges, hot zones, radio silence conditions. One evac was marked high risk. The 2 lead birds were reassigned to that. Another name got clipped at the last second for minor maintenance delay. No one blinked. Jessie stepped forward just enough to be heard without raising her voice. She didn't interrupt, but she timed it to the pause between Hayes reviewing altitude bands and assigning the next hold pattern. "Sir, if the ridge wind holds at 5.2, the North Pass is a false choke. If they shift east, we'll get distortion off the saddle. The vectors posted on the manifest are old." Hayes didn't turn. He didn't need to. His eyes flicked to her just once, and his tone didn't rise or fall. "Appreciate it, Reyes, but we're keeping the combat crews on mission profile. Standby holds." He moved on without pause. There was no malice in it, no smirk, no smothered laugh from the others, just a seamless continuation of structure, a hierarchy that didn't recognize her as part of the equation. Jessie nodded once and stepped back. She said nothing more. The younger pilots kept talking. One asked another about ration swaps from last week's outpost drop. Someone else flipped a marker between his fingers and started sketching a pattern on the edge of a laminated checklist. The room smelled faintly of sweat and warm canvas, the kind that never left these tents, no matter how many times the liners were replaced. Jessie folded the annotated terrain map she had brought with her and tucked it back into the narrow chest pocket of her flight suit. The map wasn't standard issue. She had copied it by hand from last month's radar drift overlays. The notes were written in tight, even lines, altitudes, drift, angles, wind gap, tolerances. She smoothed the corner with her thumb before sealing the pocket. Across the room, someone laughed. Not at her. Not at anything in particular. Just the kind of laugh that belonged in a space where no one thought the stakes were immediate yet. The projector screen showed static until the weather uplink reset, then flared back to life. Jessie didn't look at it again. Her call sign patch, Dust Off 3, was still folded and sealed in her vest pocket. The Velcro edges never applied. She didn't wear it unless she flew. It had been 6 rotations since anyone cleared her beyond standby. As the meeting wound down, Hayes dismissed the room without preamble. Everyone filtered out, boots clapping hard and fast down the metal-ribbed flooring. Pilots moved toward the hangars, loose and casual. Jessie stood until the last group passed. She shifted the helmet under her arm and walked out quietly into the morning, the sun still too low to burn off the dust clinging to the edges of the runway. She had checked her aircraft hours ago. Systems were clean. Fuel was at 100.0. Hydraulics balanced. Medkit stocked by her own hand. Everything was ready. But that wasn't what the board had asked of her. She adjusted the gloves at her hip and turned toward the far lot. The wind stirred faintly through the open flaps behind her. No one called her name. No one had needed to. She was not there to be seen. She was there to be ready. The hangar didn't sleep. Not fully. It exhaled in groans and echoes, metal cooling under desert air, fuel lines contracting in the stillness, near the rear pallets, beyond the reach of the overhead floodlights. Jessie moved in practiced sequence. Her boots scuffed against the concrete where the paint had worn thin. She carried no clipboard, no checklist, and didn't need one. Her flashlight blinked at the hinge with a dull stutter. She twisted the casing, realigned the contacts, and brought the beam to full strength without pause. Her bunk sat 3 meters from the fuel bladder, tucked against a frame wall with no insulation. Overflow housing for personnel without assignments. The cot was stripped and tight, a folded towel at its foot. Above it, a metal storage bin held exactly what she needed. 1 clean flight suit, 3 pairs of socks, and a tin of laminated index cards, edges curled and ink faded. Each card held handwritten notations, altitude corrections, pressure shifts, terrain markers with minor updraft warnings. She didn't look at the cards every morning, just the ones marked with a green dot. Today's showed a hilltop saddle east of the forward ridge, crosswinds predicted at 14 knots. She folded it once, slid it into her sleeve pocket, and closed the bin. Outside, the hangar's shadows pulled long across the pavement. Jessie walked to her Blackhawk without sound. It wasn't on the rotation, but that didn't matter. Maintenance records didn't log presence. She climbed the step rail by muscle memory, each grip a familiar shape under her gloves. Her hands moved slowly across the edge of the console, checking switches and knobs, not to turn them, just to feel that they were still where they should be. She paused beside the left engine intake, pressed her palm against the cowling, and listened. No warmth yet, but the metal told her what it always did. The bird hadn't moved in 2 rotations, but it was ready. The pre-start sequence was hypothetical. No clearance meant no ignition. Still, she sat in the pilot's seat and ran through the rhythm. Panel scan, switches neutral, brake confirmed, fuel switch verified. Her finger hovered just above the starter. Not touching, just close enough to remember its weight. The smell of aviation grease lingered faintly beneath the air freshener clipped by a past co-pilot. She didn't remove it. She ignored it. The cockpit glass caught the first line of blue on the horizon. Jessie adjusted her position to check the reflection angle. Her face was calm, unreadable. A thin scar ran along the collarbone line, visible only when the harness pulled the fabric tight. She never covered it, but never explained it either. She moved to the medpack shelf and ran her hand over the outer straps. 3 pouches. The middle one needed a new closure tie. She replaced it from the stash she kept in her belt kit. The gloves hanging there were stitched at the cuffs. Small initials, just visible. They weren't hers. She had found them during a winter exercise 2 years ago. No one claimed them. She had kept them for balance. The maintenance crew wouldn't show for another hour. She used the time to recheck the stabilizer angle on the rear rotor. 1 degree off. Not enough to ground the bird, but enough to nag her sense of symmetry. She adjusted the trim bolt by hand, then checked it again, with a flat gauge. It clicked into alignment. Only she would know it had been wrong. Back inside the hangar, the fuel technician dragged a hose cart past the frame. He didn't look in her direction. Jessie didn't wave. She folded a cloth over her hand and began wiping down the lower console. The crew chief wouldn't notice, but she would. A dull film of dust had settled near the nav display. She cleaned it with precision. In her locker sat a paper envelope. The top was folded, the seal broken long ago. Inside was a citation packet printed with her name in bold. The ink had faded, and one line had been struck through with red pen, not qualified for elevation. The signature box remained unsigned. She didn't read it. She kept it under her spare set of harness clips, not for nostalgia, but to occupy space that would otherwise be empty. Beside the envelope was a clear plastic sleeve. Inside, her call sign patch rested, never used. The Velcro was still crisp. It read, "Dust Off 3." She had ordered it when she was first assigned the airframe. It had never been issued. She closed the locker without a sound. Back at the aircraft, the dawn had pushed the hangar light into pale shadow. Jessie circled the Blackhawk once more. Every bolt was in place. The external medlift rig was intact. The skids were tight against the pad, unmoved. A few voices echoed from the far end of the hangar, the other crews starting to stir. She didn't look back. She stepped into the bird again, placed both hands on the yoke, and sat still for a full minute. The machine spoke in pressure and balance, in checked systems and clean flow. It didn't care about rotations or orders or call signs. It only needed to know it was ready. She didn't fly that morning. She didn't expect to. But if the call came, even 1 minute late, she would already be strapped in. The alert came through on a secure channel, buried under routine traffic, barely louder than the background drone of ceiling fans and air scrubbers in the ops tent. The tech at the console stiffened first. He read the line twice before standing and handing the slip to Colonel Hayes without speaking. "Forward fire team requesting immediate medevac," the colonel said after a beat. "One critical, Marine unit, grid marker, Echo 2-3. He scanned the whiteboard behind him. Red marker still uncapped in his hand. Storms pressing the saddle. No clear line by 1400. The air changed. A few of the younger pilots shifted in place. One rubbed the back of his neck and glanced toward the ceiling like it might offer a different forecast. Another bent down to recheck a bootstrap he'd already tightened. "We've got wind shear," someone said. "Updrafts rolling through the middle pass. You want to thread that with a med rig and no cover." Hayes didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the board. Names were listed, but most of them were crossed or marked pending. 2 pilots were grounded for rotor diagnostics. Another was listed as secondary due to fatigue protocol. The rest hovered just out of reach present, but uncommitted. Jessie stood behind the outer column, just inside the tent. She had not moved since the call came in. Her hands were still looped calmly in front of her. She waited until the next pause in conversation. The wind picked up against the tent wall and snapped the canvas twice. "I can take it," she said. Hayes didn't respond right away. He looked toward her, not dismissively, but with the weight of calculation. No one else spoke. The room felt compressed. Jessie didn't repeat herself. She stood with her shoulders level, helmet in one hand, kneeboard clipped flat against her leg. He nodded once. "Flight path's yours. Loadout's light. Keep your bird under threshold and make the window. You're cleared." The red marker didn't write her call sign. It wrote her last name, Reyes, underlined once. She turned without waiting for further instruction. The med crew assigned to the case was already assembling by the fuel pallets. One of them, a broad-shouldered corpsman with a half-rolled sleeve, raised an eyebrow. "We're flying Dust Off Barbie today," he muttered to no one in particular. The others didn't laugh, but they didn't correct him either. Jessie passed without flinching. She moved straight to the Blackhawk and began the checklist she had already run twice that morning. Engine pressure was steady. Rotor clearance held. Wind readings were pushing borderline, but she adjusted for them automatically. Her grease pencil marked a line across the HUD glass, a new descent angle for the changing air currents. She unfolded her flight map and set it across her knee. The notations were hers alone. No digital overlays, just altitude curves and wind forecasts layered by hand, updated that morning. The medic climbed in behind her, still shaking his head. "Didn't think you were up for this one, ma'am. No offense." She didn't answer. The radios crackled once. confirming clearance. Her kneeboard checklist bore no stamp, no seal, just her initials in small print on the bottom margin. She flipped to the final page and clipped it into place. In the cockpit, she strapped in without ceremony. The seatbelt clicked. Her gloves settled firm on the yoke. The vibrations in the frame told her everything she needed. Fuel was full. Engine noise was balanced. She didn't need to check the panel again. From the tower, Colonel Hayes stood watching. He didn't speak into the mic. He simply lowered the slip of paper in his hand and let the door fall shut behind him. The base had gone quiet, except for the wind. Jesse lifted off at 11:23. The wheels cleared the ground in one motion. No dip, no shift. The bird responded like it had been waiting. As they rose over the compound wall, the medic finally looked out the side glass and realized they were already gaining altitude fast enough to pull under the weather shelf. "Guess we're going?" he said. Jessie didn't reply. Her eyes stayed locked on the ridgeline. She adjusted pitch 1 degree and opened the comms channel to scan for movement. Nothing returned. She rerouted the path through the lower saddle, the same angle she had practiced in silence 3 nights ago during standby. She didn't need permission to be ready. The aircraft cut through the early thermal drift without turbulence. The medic steadied himself against the cabin rail and watched her fly. No autopilot, no commentary, just hands, machine, and air. By the time the first drops of storm vapor hit the canopy, Jessie had already dropped them into approach altitude. They were inbound. The impact came without warning, just a snap of metal and a drop that jerked the frame sideways before the rotors lost lift. Jessie didn't shout. Her hands tightened on the yoke, fighting the final seconds of control as the Blackhawk twisted against the slope. She braced for the roll, feathered the pitch, and took the angle low and flat. The skids hit rock and scraped sideways until the left one gave. Then everything stopped. Steam hissed through the cracked instrument panel. One blade had folded down across the ground. The tips splintered. Fuel smell clung to the interior, faint but rising. Jessie coughed once, blinked out the dust, and checked her limbs before unbuckling. Her headset was gone. The radio lights blinked red. Dead signal. She looked left. Her co-pilot was slumped forward, head against the glass, unconscious but breathing. Blood pooled beneath the seat. She turned. The medic in the back had a gash across his shoulder and was already pressing gauze to it with one hand. "Still here," he said through his teeth. The Marine on the stretcher hadn't moved. Jessie crawled toward him, low and fast. One leg was trapped beneath the dislodged cargo net. She cut the cord with her belt blade and shifted his weight with care. His face was gray, soaked in sweat. She touched his neck, found the pulse thin, but holding. The medkit had scattered across the cabin. She pulled what she could reach. The IV bag was intact. She bit the cap, spat it out, and ran the line in blind. The bag swung gently from a seatbelt strap she tied into a loop. It held. The wind screamed down the mountain wall, tugging at the tail section. The door was jammed halfway open. Jessie used a broken panel to wedge it wide. Light cut across the inside orange and low. Twilight already. They had maybe an hour before full dark. She moved the wounded Marine closer to the cockpit wall, where the metal blocked the wind. She rolled a spare jacket under his back, checked the gauze over his thigh, and reapplied pressure with a taped wrap. He moaned once, eyes fluttering, then went still again. She didn't speak to him. She kept moving. From the wreckage, she pulled 3 flare tubes. 2 were cracked but usable. The third had no striker. She placed them in a triangle around the Blackhawk, the points facing uphill. Her hands bled from where the metal skin had split under pressure. She didn't look at them. The signal mirror was still in her vest. She checked it, found the chip on the edge, and ignored it. It would still throw light. She stepped out of the wreck and surveyed the ridge. The peak above was 50 meters. Steep rock. No path. No cover. She went anyway. Her boots slipped twice. On the third try, she found a grip in the stone and used her elbows to pull forward. Her palm scraped open again. The blood smeared across the mirror's back as she climbed. The air thinned. A gust pushed hard enough to knock her sideways once. She caught herself on both knees and kept going. At the top, she lay flat. The last orange light of day stretched low across the valley. Clouds were stacking behind the far ridge, fast and dark. She held the mirror flat to the sun, angled once, then again. A series of small flashes bounced off the cliff face. Nothing moved. She kept flashing, 5 beats at a time, then paused, then again. Still nothing. She dropped flat and rested the mirror beside her chest. The ground was sharp and cold. Wind lifted strands of hair across her eyes. She pushed them back with one muddy hand and looked at the sky. Below, the Marine hadn't called out. That was good. He was either resting or unconscious again. The medic had stayed still. She descended the ridge more slowly. Her legs shook, but her steps held. The flare triangle still burned low and steady. She checked the IV bag. Half drained. The line was clear. She repositioned the Marine again, added another wrap to the thigh, then placed his helmet gently beside him. The shell was scratched, the emblem nearly worn away. She rested it at an angle so he would see it first if he opened his eyes. She adjusted the flare angle once more, then sat just inside the torn cabin door. Her gloves were gone. Her hands trembled, but her breath stayed even. The wind whistled through the broken glass above her head. No sound came from the radio. She tried once, then left it. The mirror sat beside her knee, wet with blood, but whole. She would wait. The low thrum of rotor wash arrived before the silhouette. Jessie looked up from the wreckage just as the Scout Blackhawk crested the ridge, its lights dimmed to avoid detection. It banked once, uncertain, until the pilot spotted the flare triangle burning faintly across the clearing. The pattern was precise 3 points. Fixed elevation, one angle open to the southeast. That was the lane. That was the signal. The aircraft hovered above the descent line. The crew chief leaned out, scanning below. Jessie stood in full view beside the downed Marine. Her arm lifted slowly, palm out, steady. No urgency, no panic. She pointed once toward the wind line, then stepped back. The winch cable dropped with a slight sway. She steadied it herself. The medic was barely able to move, shoulder-bound with a splint made from crate plastic and gauze. Jessie motioned him forward, helped him secure the harness without speaking. He nodded once, jaw tight, and disappeared into the rising dark. The Marine was next. Jessie clipped the stretcher frame to the secondary hook, checked both clamps, then held the tag in place while the lift began. The wind pressed hard against her back. She didn't watch the ascent. She held the cord taut until it cleared the ledge, then released. Only then did she reach for the cable again. The crew chief didn't shout. He didn't lean out to help. He just braced the ladder and kept his eyes on her. Jessie climbed with slow control. Her boots were streaked with ash and her gloves were torn. Her helmet was cracked across the side panel. She didn't adjust it. She moved with the exact rhythm required to make the climb clean. When she reached the door, the crew chief offered one hand. She took it once, stepped inside, and lowered to the floor beside the Marine's stretcher. No one spoke. The door slid shut. The flight back was quiet. No one gave her instructions. No one asked questions. Jessie sat against the rear wall, hands folded in her lap, mirror tucked inside her vest pocket. It was warm from her body heat, streaked with dried blood. The coiled flight cord hung from her belt, 3 loops exact. Not standard issue. The Blackhawk landed at the forward pad just after 2200. The night was windless. The base lit up in sections, enough to mark the landing path. The crew chief unlocked the side door and stepped out. Jessie stood second, then climbed down after the gurney. She rolled it herself. The med team met her halfway. They didn't recognize her at first. One of them took the handle and started to ask who brought him in, then caught sight of the uniform blackened, soaked. No insignia showing. Only a faint call sign patch was visible now, smeared but legible. Dust off 3. Was she flying, one of them asked? Nobody answered. The gurney turned toward the emergency canopy. Jessie stepped back. Colonel Hayes stood at the edge of the tarmac, hands behind his back. He didn't move to intercept, He didn't speak. As Jesse passed, he watched her without expression. His jaw was set. His posture was still. She nodded once, then walked past him. The hangar lights glowed against the far wall. A few figures lingered outside, drinking coffee from metal cups, watching the noise die down. One of them recognized her, one of the same pilots from the morning brief. He lowered his cup slowly. His mouth opened, then closed. He didn't say a word. Jessie walked to the rear bay, peeled off her gloves, and placed them on the edge of the tool crate. Her boots left tracks behind her. She didn't look back. Inside, the workbench lamp flickered. She sat down without cleaning up first. The logbook waited in the drawer where she kept it. She opened it to the next clean page and began to write. No fanfare, no summary, just coordinates, time of launch, grid pattern, patient status. At the bottom, she added a final line. Evac complete. 1 critical stabilized, aircraft lost. Her hands didn't tremble. She closed the log and slid it back into the drawer. Outside, the last of the flight crew rolled the refueling cart across the gravel. She reached up, unfastened her cracked helmet, and set it beside the gloves. Behind her, someone passed through the hangar door, paused, then kept walking. No one stopped her. No one gave orders. The mission was done. The airfield was quiet before sunrise. That hour belonged to the ground crews, the early risers, the ones who didn't wait for rotation orders to get moving. In the corner office beside the ops tent, Colonel Hayes sat alone with the logbooks spread out in front of him. He had a mug of something warm in his hand and a red pen resting on top of a file that hadn't been initialed. There was no paperwork from Jesse, no mission report submitted, no recommendation form or request for commendation, just a flight line entry logged by one of the rescue pilots from the Scout Black Hawk 1 evac performed. Aircrew unknown. Ground signal used. The coordinates matched the distress beacon. The patient's condition had been updated as stable. The name of the pilot was never entered. Hayes reached into the side drawer and pulled out a slip from the personnel queue. It was already half filled. He flipped it over, uncapped the pen, and wrote in 2 clear lines. Reassign call sign, dust off 3, full mission status reinstated. Then he signed it. Outside, the sun pushed a thin band of color across the flight board. The new rotation was drawn in red marker. Most names were carried forward from the previous week. Jessie's name appeared at the top. She didn't see it. She had been inside the hangar since before the lights came on. Her gloves sat on the bench beside her, mended where the seams had split. The stitching was visible, not decorative, just functional. Her boots were cleaned, but not new. The edges still held a thin crease from the rocks along the ridge. She moved without sound, adjusting a tool rack that no one else had used in days. She had opened the maintenance log an hour earlier. Her handwriting was clear, measured, and printed in black pen. No embellishment, just a single entry marked with the date and flight time. She listed the grid coordinates. The altitude reading was recorded as 2,300. Below that, she wrote a line in the margin LZ held. No comms, no loss. Then, next to the location code, she added a string of digits by hand, the Marine's tag number. She closed the book and slid it back into the drawer. Outside, the first briefing group moved toward the ops tent. Some were still laughing from something passed around over breakfast. A few looked like they hadn't seen sleep. One young pilot broke off from the pack and crossed toward the hangar. He paused in the doorway when he saw Jessie working at the bench. He had been at the mission board the day before, one of the ones who had smirked when the assignment skipped her name. He didn't speak. He just gave a quiet nod. Jessie met his eyes, nodded back, then returned to what she was doing. The recoiled gloves were placed neatly beside her log notes. Her helmet had been cleaned and rested upside down near the case. She adjusted the chin strap once, then left it. She walked across the hangar to check the flight kit. It was restocked and ready. No one had asked her to do that. By the time the operations tent filled, her name was already listed on the assignment board. Red ink, dust off 3, no remarks. Colonel Hayes stepped outside just as the second rotation gathered. He didn't call attention. He didn't need to. One of the officers leaned in close to read the updates. His expression shifted. Not surprised. Just different. Like something he had forgotten was suddenly present again. Jessie passed by the board 10 minutes later without glancing up. Her steps were steady. She held a folded mission chart in one hand, thumb pressed against a corner where the paper had begun to tear. She entered the fuel depot, logged the aircraft's readiness by hand, then walked the tarmac to her bird. The Black Hawk wasn't hers by title, but the feel of it metal under touch, balance in the tail, flex in the mount, belonged to her. She circled once, ran her fingers beneath the exhaust line, and checked the medbay panel latches. Everything sealed clean. She placed the helmet inside the cockpit and sat on the edge of the entry rail. The base around her moved in the rhythm of daily startup. Nothing about her posture demanded attention. Nothing about her face asked for it. Still, one by one, the others adjusted their stride when they passed. They didn't speak. They didn't look away either. Inside the ops tent, the logbook sat where she had left it. The last page was written in pen. The mission was finished. Not every rescue ends in applause. Not every leader wears rank. Jessie was never the loudest voice in the room, never the name called first, but when it mattered, she was the one who moved. Quietly, precisely, without waiting for permission. In a world that overlooked her, she chose to be ready, not for recognition, but because someone had to be. That kind of strength doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need the spotlight. It simply shows up, again and again, until the mission is done. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever held steady when no one was watching, then you understand. Take a moment. Think about the people like Jessie in your own life, or maybe the one in the mirror. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts below, and follow for more stories that honor quiet strength, earned respect, and the power of being prepared.